Way back in the 1980s, when I was furiously studying to become an aerospace engineer at the University of Illinois, I was in awe of stories of the rocket plane test pilots. Guys like Chuck Yeager, you've heard of him, and you've heard of Neil Armstrong, who got a little more famous for, walking on the moon thing. These guys would strap themselves into a ridiculously overpowered craft, a ridiculously untested craft, and fly it to within an inch of its either crashing, breaking apart, losing control, or killing them, or all four. They were kind of related. The glory days of the rocket plane test pilot was the 1950s, when slide rule science and cowboy ethics ran Edwards Air Force Base. It was depicted reasonably accurately and quite colorfully in Tom Wolfe's 1979 book that I devoured called The Right Stuff. In just over a decade, experimental rocket planes went from Chuck Yeager barely breaking the sound barrier at 700 miles an hour to Armstrong and others in the X-15 reaching 4,500 miles an hour and just touching the edge of space. And every advance came because some test pilot did what was called pushing the envelope. Now, despite the silly photo on the front of your bulletin, pushing the envelope has nothing to do with stationary or with doors. In aircraft design, the envelope refers to the operating limits of the aircraft. And to stress a plane up to its design limits and then a little bit beyond in speed, in G-forces, in altitude was called pushing the envelope. In Wolfe's account in The Right Stuff, the cowboy flyboy ethic was this: faster, harder, higher. And when they pushed the envelope a little bit further, sometimes they learned some new bit about aeronautical science. And sometimes they learned some new bit about how the plane behaved. And sometimes the plane broke. And sometimes a pilot was killed. And sometimes a hero emerged from the wreckage. That's what Tom Wolfe called the right stuff. And it all came from pushing the envelope.
So in this morning's reading from Acts, we have this strange story about Simon Peter. And if you read through the book of Acts, in chapter 10, it tells the actual story in a much longer version. And chapter 11 is Simon Peter relating what happened in chapter 10, again, in a lot of detail. And so that's what we shared with you this morning. It's our suggestion this morning that Simon Peter is a test pilot for the Holy Spirit in this reading. This is, Simon Peter. I often call him foot in his mouth Simon Peter, impulsive Simon Peter, sometimes kind of cowardly Simon Peter. The Holy Spirit is asking him to test the limits of what he believes God is calling people to do. He's on a journey into Gentile territory in Joppa, and he's in prayer when he has this vision where a blanket comes down with all kinds of creatures on it, which in his head he's divided into clean, which means it's okay to eat, it's kosher, literally kosher, and unclean, which is forbidden to eat, not kosher. And when, as an observant Jew, when he's asked to eat what is in front of him, he protests that he has never let anything unclean touch his mouth. And he's told really plainly not to call unclean what God has called clean. Now, we who don't keep kosher, which I'm guessing is probably most of us in this room, if not all of us, and online.
I love a good lizard burger.
We hear this and we think, well, yeah, that makes sense. But for Peter, this flew in the face of everything he had been taught all his life, what he believed to be a God-given, a God-commanded rule between clean and unclean food. And it doesn't just happen once, it happens 3 times, right? God's making a point. And so a few moments later, when Peter is called to witness to the good news of Jesus, to a group of non-Jews, unclean and pagan Gentiles from a Jewish perspective, and these supposedly ungodly Gentiles receive the Holy Spirit just as the disciples did at Pentecost, Peter says, if God gave them the same gift, who was I that I could hinder God? And so he baptizes them. It's an unthinkable crossing of what had always been considered a God-given line between the faithful and the unfaithful, the clean and the unclean, and Peter pushes across it.
In his strange vision, Peter recognized that God was breaking down that human need to divide into clean and unclean, or us or them, because God is the all-encompassing source of love and life for all of humanity, for all of creation. Peter's words in chapter 10, which we didn't read, but I invite you to go back and read chapter 10, he says to the Gentiles, I truly understand that God shows no partiality. God has shown me that I should not call anyone profane or unclean. Not just anything, but anyone. Peter, with this vision, became a test pilot for the Holy Spirit. He pushed the envelope of what was considered by his religious standards to be holy. And when he stepped over that long accepted boundary, Peter found, to his surprise, that the Holy Spirit was alive and active on the other side. The good news of God's love was not to be constrained to a particular time or place or people. This is the real right stuff, showing that all people are God's beloved children. Test pilots for the Holy Spirit. I feel like such a Baptist when I say that. Test pilots for the Holy Spirit are all about the right stuff, which is pushing the envelope of love. The early Christian church was known and criticized for their communal meals where there were no boundaries, where rich and poor ate together as equals, where, as Paul would write in the book of Galatians, there is no Jew or Greek, there is no male or female, there is no slave or free. All those boundaries are gone, for all are one in Jesus Christ. It was scandalous, and it was holy.
Centuries later, in England, John Wesley's Reform movement reached out to people which the Anglican Church of his day had sort of stopped paying attention to. The poor and the less educated, miners and mill workers and widows and orphans. It was scandalous, and it got Wesley disinvited to preach in Anglican churches. So he preached out in the fields, and people thronged to him, and they received the good news. It was scandalous. It started a movement that we continue to be part of, and it was holy.
Again and again, the church at its best shows the right stuff by pushing the envelope of love and inclusivity. It hasn't always done that. But at our best, the people of God have reached across lines of class and race, of sexuality, of gender, of ability. And it's often been scandalous to the status quo. And it's often offended the properly pious religionists. But it's been holy.
And we believe that we continue to be called as the church to be test pilots for the Holy Spirit, to push the envelope, especially at this time, when our national government is doing all it can, it seems, to pull in the boundaries of that envelope between who is clean and unclean, who is in and out, who is us and who is them, and to disappear or ignore or simply pretend them doesn't exist.
It is essential then that we as people of faith push the envelope and push the envelope publicly, as uncomfortable as that might be. Here's one way that we're suggesting is that we show up as people of faith for Pride Month in June. We want to pull together a group of people of faith for the activities and the witnesses for that month, and particularly for the Boston Pride March on June 14th. And if you want to be a part of that as a community, let us know. Online, put it in the chat that you want to be a part of it. We'll be part of pushing the envelope for the Holy Spirit, of demonstrating God's radically inclusive love for all God's children.
And we want to offer another way, a less publicly out in the world way, maybe. A second way to be a test pilot for the Holy Spirit is prayer. Peter received this vision when he was in prayer. And it's one of the ways we open our hearts again and again to God's nudging us in directions that maybe we wouldn't have thought to go. And so this morning, we are going to ask you to pray with each other. Hear me out. I'm going to ask you to pair up with someone else in the congregation.
Someone you don't know well.
Yeah, maybe someone you didn't come with this morning, though that's up to you. And I'm going to ask you to do this with each other. I'm going to ask one of you to say to the other what you would like that person to pray for you. Not for your aunt with cancer, much as she needs prayer, but something that you need praying for. And then the other person will pray for you. And then you'll switch. The other person will tell you what they want prayed for them, and you will pray for them. At the end of this prayer time, promise each other that you will pray for each other every day this coming week. Does that make sense? You got it? This is, whenever I ask congregations to do this, everyone's eyes are usually this big because, we're mainline Christians. And I often say, I know this is not what you expected this morning. Please do it anyway. It's worth it. So, go ahead.
So you probably need to get up and move around a little bit to find a person that you didn't come with.
And while people are moving, those of you online, please put your prayer needs in the chat. And if you want to make a partnership in that chat space, please do so. Thank you to all of you. Thank you all. The challenge with Methodists is always getting them to come back together, right? Thank you all, and I'm sorry if I'm interrupting your prayers. Please hold each other in prayer this next week. If you wish to be in touch with each other, you're welcome to. You do not need to be, though you might touch base some other time when you're both in this space and just connect and see how things are. This is what it is to be a test pilot for God. It's in the things that are deep inside us, and it's in the ways that we live outside as well. And so thank you for being part of that, all of us together.